Hello, and thank you for attending IEBC's Providing Student Support Services in Extraordinary Times, a Caring Campus Approach. We are glad that so many folks are joining us, not only from around the country, but also from as far away as Puerto Rico. So thank you for joining us. We're going to get started here, and we want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. Therefore, folks who weren't able to attend, or if you'd like to share it, will be able to review it on IEBC's website next week when the recording gets loaded. This webinar is made possible by the generous support from the California Community College Chancellor's Office, as well as the Ascendium Education Group. So we want to thank our sponsors for this webinar. Also, please note that we know that there will be lots of questions, and we're going to take questions in the end, and there'll be plenty of time, we believe, for answering any of the questions. And since there are so many folks, we're going to take a look at the themes that the questions are presenting and provide that as well. One of the things that we really wanted to share on this webinar is the idea of not just what to do in a virtual environment for increasing the connection of student supports to all of your students, but also how to do that. We've been on a number of webinars, as I'm sure many of you have as well, and we learn a lot about what others are doing or what to do, but we haven't found a lot of webinars that really talk about the specifics. So for today, we're going to get into those specifics about how to engage with students, not just what you should be doing. This work that we're presenting today comes from our work in Caring Campus with over 50 colleges in California and around the United States. So we feel like we have a pretty good data set to share with everyone. With that, let me introduce everyone that will be presenting today. My name is Brad Phillips. I direct the Caring Campus Initiative and direct IEBC. And I am with my colleague, Jordan Horowitz, who's co-directing the Caring Campus work. And he is our Chief Operating Officer. Jordan and my background is such that we were former therapists. And so we have pretty much an ancient history of working with clients and being able to understand the psychology and the neuroscience behind connection. Our third panelist is Christina Horton, and we're so grateful that Christina is here. Christina is from San Antonio College, and she is the Director of Strategic Initiatives from the Office of the President at SAC in the Alamo District. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jordan Horowitz, to get us started. Jordan?
Hi, folks. Thank you, Brad. Okay, so a few things about working together in Zoom. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar and video is turned off. We had over 450 registrants and thought that would be a bit overwhelming, so that's how we're working this webinar. Also, we are not using the Q&A function. Please use your chat to pose questions. Our support staff, Brad and I, will be monitoring the chat for key themes, and those will be addressed during the Q&A at the end. So remember to use the chat function for your questions. Today's agenda, we're going to start with an overview of the Caring Campus Initiative. Then we're going to present a few of the assumptions about colleges working in a virtual environment that have an impact on some of the recommendations and building the structure issues in the guide. As Brad mentioned, this webinar is based on our first Caring Campus guide. Next, we'll talk about building the structure, some of the things you might want to have in place as you move forward, reaching out to your students and supporting them. Then we're going to present 3 behavioral commitments. I'll talk about how Caring Campus is grounded in behavioral commitments from staff. Then we'll do a little bit of what's coming up from IEBC for you and move to Q&A. So let's get started with some content. IEBC's Caring Campus Initiative. Our initiative is grounded in research that students who are connected to their college are more likely to succeed in their coursework, persist from term to term, and complete their educational goals. Many of you might be aware of this research. The seminal work that really got this going was Vincent Tinto's book, Leaving College, in 1993, and there's been considerable research since then. One of the most notable is Richard Light's book, Making the Most of College, Students Speak Their Minds. All of this research clearly shows that students who feel connected to their colleges and often connected directly to an individual faculty member or staff are more likely to succeed. We noticed that there were although the impact of connectedness was considerable, there was little guidance for colleges about how to improve that, and that's where Caring Campus came from. As their Caring Campus work, professional staff from student-facing departments, and this is any department that might come into contact with students, whether it's admissions and records, financial aid, facilities, buildings and grounds. These staff come together and identify and implement behavioral commitments that support student connectedness. Typical commitments, for example, could be everyone should be wearing name tags. If you notice a student who seems lost, approach them, don't wait for them to come to you, and so on. And the point is that many of these behaviors may be engaged in by some staff, but Caring Campus makes them intentional and campus-wide. We start with a leadership kickoff to ensure that cabinet-level leadership and department-level leadership support staff implementation, know what's going to be happening as part of the process, and understand how to support their staff. Caring Campus buttresses other student success initiatives. We see staff as the unsung heroes who are rarely involved in student success efforts, such as guided pathways, accelerated basic skills, college promise programs, some of the new state funding formulas. Caring Campus ensures that everyone is aware of student success initiatives and understands the role that they have to play. Resource demands are low. There are rarely a behavioral commitment that requires any resource commitment. In our experience at the 56 colleges where Caring Campus is being implemented, I think the most resource-rich demand and behavior is name tags, making sure that everyone has name tags. We employ a unique coaching facilitation model. This is not one and done professional development. It is not a series of workshops or trainings. We went to the dictionary and saw that coaches do two things. They provide knowledge about the fundamentals, and they help to create a system-wide approach. And that's what our coaches do. We don't come to the college and tell staff these are behaviors in which you need to engage. Our coaches help staff create these behaviors, identify these behaviors, and develop plans for implementing them, monitoring whether or not they're happening, and communicating to 4 key groups around the campus about Caring Campus and the behavioral commitments. And those groups are leadership, colleagues, staff, faculty, and of course, students. In between coaching sessions, these representatives from the departments go back and confer with their colleagues to get feedback. They ask questions such as, are these behaviors you can commit to? Are there any behaviors missing? And in that way, one of the big side effects of Caring Campus, other than student connectedness, is how it improves team building, communication, and collegiality among staff. Currently, Caring Campus is in 56 colleges around the US. As Brad mentioned, most of these are funded by the Community Colleges Chancellor's Office or the Ascendium Education Group, but we do also work with colleges on a self-pay basis. So let's look at some of the assumptions moving forward that we use to base this work. Now, not all of these assumptions are going to pertain to your college, but we wanted to get them out there. So first, we assume that the college has the ability to forward calls to staff members at home. We also assume that professional staff are working from home most, if not all of the time, are at least connected by telephone, either a landline or a mobile phone, are in contact with their supervisors and other staff members, have access to a computer and internet some of the time at home. As we all know, they're likely to have distractions and responsibilities working from home, as we all do, such as children who are home from school, family responsibilities, and other issues that might take them away from their work during regular business hours. And finally, professional staff are willing, able, and want to continue to work with and serve the students at your college. Let's move to building the structure. First, it's important to make call forwarding available from work to home. In many of the caring campus colleges that we work with, they make this available. Not all staff take advantage of it. Some simply work from their home phones or internet numbers, but it should be available to all on campus. You want to ensure that staff have the resources they need. And what do we mean by resources? Not just the electronic resources, but do they have the documents they need in order to answer the questions and address issues that students might have? Make sure you provide consistent messaging. If there are issues that are coming up frequently across a number of students, or if there are messages that the college wants to ensure all students receive, staff should be provided with messaging that they can use that's consistent across all staff members. You also want to expand staff's access to multiple online platforms. Not everyone is using Zoom. Students frequently prefer texting to email or phone calls. So you want to make sure that your staff have access to multiple online platforms, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meets, and so on. And there are some considerations. And our guest, Christina Horton, will be addressing how her college took care of some of these. But you want to make sure that privacy is maintained, perhaps using the *67 function to mask phone numbers. Also, are your staff going to incur additional charges for participating in this with their own homes? And now I'd like to turn it over to Brad, who will be talking about specific behavioral commitments in a virtual world. Brad?
Let's talk about our first behavioral commitment. And the traditional commitment before the novel coronavirus that many colleges wanted to engage in was something we call the 10-foot rule. Now, this could be a warehouse person delivering something across campus. It could be in your own offices, any student support services. But the 10-foot rule basically says when you are within 10 feet of a student, you say hello, you introduce yourself, you ask them if you could be helpful. Think about this. Many of our students who come to our campuses, they're first generation, they're scared. In fact, some are even afraid to get out of their cars. But walking up to a student, hopefully with a name badge, introducing yourself and saying hello really helps the student feel cared about and feel like they belong, which is really critical. One of the phrases that we use with this work is students come where they feel welcome and stay where they feel cared about. Now that we're in a virtual world, however, the way to think about the 10-foot rule is rather than doing what a lot of colleges are doing, which is sending out emails to students, changing their website and showing what to click on, is being more proactive. And that is reaching out to students before they contact you. That means not just email, but also calling them and texting them. And when a phone call is made, what we are suggesting in terms of the how to do this work is all staff members should have a list of students to call. And Christina's going to talk in more detail about this. But once they have those students to call, the first thing we suggest is to text them to let them know that you will be calling. The reason we do that is in this generation of students, most operate by text. And if they see a strange number coming up on their phone, if it's coming from your personal line as a professional staff member, and if you hit *67, it will be masked, then you want to make sure that they know this call from your college will be coming. And once that contact is made, start with introducing oneself. So, hi, my name is Brad Phillips, and I'm from Alpha College. And I'm here to chat with you about your welfare and how things are going. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you have that student's contact information. And Jordan later will talk about the development of a log. And the first question we want to ask them is just to check on how they're doing. We know, and especially through the work of the Hope Center with Sarah Goldrick-Rab, that there are students that are homeless, they are food insecure, they may be living alone. We want to find out how they're doing. And you should have those resources available to assist that student in terms of their needs. Once that's done, it's important to communicate any kind of what we call canned message about what the college wants the student to know. It could be enrollment dates coming up for the summer semester or fall semester. It could be things to know about the college and any information that you think that the college believes that the student needs to know. And then finally, try to answer any questions that the student may have to the best of your ability. And we'll talk about how to move that to the next step in a couple slides. The bottom line with this work is to help alleviate any concerns that a student has. It sends a caring message, and it's a supportive message. And I know this is not something we would normally do in a face-to-face environment, is reaching out to as many students as we can. But in this novel world, this is really one of the only ways we have to connect with students. Now with that, I'd like to introduce Christina Horton, who directs the strategic initiatives for the Office of the President at Alamo Colleges. And she's particularly at San Antonio College. And I just want to say, I'm grateful that Christina is joining us. They are one of our caring campuses, and I've had the great pleasure of working with the Alamo Colleges for the last 15 years as the Achieving the Dream coach along with Kay McClenny. So I know the Alamo district quite well, and Christina, I'm grateful for you to say how San Antonio College is being proactive. Christina?
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm really pleased for the opportunity to not only be here and share with colleagues across the nation how we've connected with our students to show that we care about them as individuals, but also just to be part of the presentation, because I'm seeing things in ways that we could improve for our next wave of outreach. So that this is really a great opportunity in both ways for me. So greetings from San Antonio, Texas. Happy to be with you, and let me just start by saying how proud I am of my campus, our employees and our students, for really taking a can-do spirit and just getting things done and being resilient and tenacious, and everyone getting to the finish line together. This is new for everyone, and I just think our students have done a great job. So in terms of proactive outreach and connection, we're really reaching out to all of our student body. So we have a student body of right around 20,000 students, and we are reaching out to every student, from our highest performers to those who need more intensive levels of support. And primarily this communication, this outreach is being done by faculty and advisors. And they're doing a great job of connecting with each of those students and influencing their ability to finish out the semester successfully. But within that group, there are two smaller projects two smaller outreaches that we did for students that we felt might need extra support. So the two groups that we identified for the targeted outreach were those whom data suggested had never taken an online class prior to our transition to remote learning, and also those who had been reported by their faculty to not have been active in Canvas and Zoom since we made the transition. So between those two, there were a combined 3,500 students on these lists, some of which were duplicated. They were on both lists, but it's okay to get 2 phone calls. Just means that many more people care about you. So it is important to note that part of the reason those particular students were targeted is that San Antonio is, I believe, the 7th largest city in the country. We're very economically segregated. The majority of our students are economically disadvantaged, and we have a fairly expansive digital divide. So presumably a lot of these students who were in face-to-face classes and were transitioned into fully online classes may not have the technology, just the basic technology they need to be successful in a fully online environment. So we decided that we would put together a team and reach out to these two groups of students. So the team that we created was comprised of about 50 employees. That was a mix of full-time and part-time employees, all of whom, of course, are working remotely now, just like our students. And the goal of the team was to support and influence the students' ability to stay in school by just effectively addressing their needs and making sure that they had those basic needs met so that they could more effectively focus on their schoolwork. So the task of each caller was to reach out to each student and discuss how their transition to remote learning was going. And throughout the course of that conversation, identify challenges that they were having, and to address those challenges either immediately or by connection. And again, we had about 3,500 of those students that we were trying to reach out to within a 3-week time frame. So before I get into the process and the resources that we provided, we'll get straight to the outcomes because I think that'll make your ears perk up. So over the course of those three weeks, we were able to reach out to 100% of those students. Now, some of those students did not have phone numbers on file, or their phone wasn't working at that time, so they received an email. But the vast majority of the students received a phone call, and we had a pretty good connection rate, or what I call a pickup rate. So we had a 32% pickup rate, which means essentially 1 in every 3 students was picking up the phone. And in my experience with reaching out to students by phone, that's really pretty good. Normally we don't get something that high. In having those conversations, we were able to identify that the 2 most common challenges were related to technology and just the general struggle with trying to adjust to remote learning, along with trying to balance everything else that was happening in the world and in the household. And a lot of students just reported that they were doing fine, maybe not perfect, but they were fine. And they really appreciated that someone had picked up the phone and reached out to them just to see how they were doing. Some students wanted to vent about what was going on in their life, so we could be there to help them do that. So it was a very effective outreach, and we're very pleased with our outcomes. In terms of the process, we again did contact students by phone. We asked the callers to document the outcome of the phone call, any challenges that had come up, any comments anything that occurred in the conversation that they felt we needed to know. So that was all documented. We had one spreadsheet for each caller. So everyone had their own spreadsheet that they could go into and work just with their students and not be overwhelmed with seeing 3,500 entries on a spreadsheet. If we were unable to reach the student, we left a voice message for them. And we did offer, when I get to the resources, I'll talk about this, but we did offer a conversation guide to help them if they did get the student on the phone, and then also to guide them about what to say if they left a message for the student. As we identified students that had needs, such as technology, needing remote tutoring, assistance with food, or even just feelings of being overwhelmed and anxious, we were able to connect those students with resources on our campus. And so we not only provided the student with the information to make the connection, but we circled back with those departments and gave the department that information so they could be proactive and reach out to the student, since the student had already identified that as a challenge. So some of the resources that we provided to make this outreach effective was we made sure that all of our callers had either forwarded their office phones or had set up Google Voice and knew how to use *67. And because then when calling students, it was coming from a blocked number or a Google Voice number, we made sure that the first thing the caller would say is, "This is an important message from San Antonio College." That way the student didn't hang up. Because students, much like us, if we don't recognize the person, we immediately think it's a telemarketer. So we wanted them to know, this is an important message from your college. We also invited every team member, every caller, to participate in an orientation so that they could understand the what, the why, and the how of what we were doing. So we discussed the goals, we discussed the deadlines, and we went over the process because we wanted every caller to feel confident and equipped to have effective communications with students. So every caller was provided a documentation sheet and a list of students, and that the list of students was proportionate to the amount of work that they were able to commit to the project. So you had some employees who were committing 4 hours a week, some were committing 30 hours a week. So of course, the list of students that they have to call are going to look very different. We did provide them a toolkit, which had all the documents that they might want to review or refer to when they were calling students, and also that they could attach and send it to a student. So if you were talking to a student and they wanted dates, you know, a final schedule, if they wanted registration dates, we could not only tell them, but we could follow up with an email and send it to them. That way they had something to refer back to. We also had the conversation guides for them. Some people refer to those as a script, but it's just a way to help guide the conversation. And we had an FAQs for common questions that students might ask. So we provided that all to them in a toolkit so that they felt more confident in answering students' questions. The other thing that we did, which our team as a whole found particularly helpful, is we designated 2 of our callers to be inbound specialists. So since quite a few of our callers, our team members, were part-time, they wouldn't necessarily be available to take a return call if a student called back. And we wanted to make sure that if a student called back, someone answered the call. So 2 of our folks just did inbound calling. And so when the caller would reach out, they would say, "We'd really like to talk to you. Sorry that we couldn't connect with you. If you have a chance, please call my colleague, Christy, at blah, blah." And then when they called back, they would reach me. It would be Christy that answered the phone, and we would have that same conversation that the initial caller would have had. And I think we ended up getting about 90 calls through those inbound callers. So that was really helpful to have that in place. Also, each team member was invited to participate in a weekly team huddle, and that allowed the callers to motivate each other to share positive stories of things that had happened in their conversation with students, ways that they were able to help. And it also helped me identify gaps, information that needed to be added to the toolkit, trends I was seeing so that I could provide the information for the callers to be more effective. And we also had email updates for those callers as things change. And back then, and even now, things are still changing, right? Things are still being developed. So I wanted to keep them abreast of all the changes so that they could provide the most accurate and timely information to the students. So it was really positive. I think that the callers really enjoyed being part of helping students be successful. I think students appreciated that someone had called out to them and was interested, knew their name, and wanted to help them be successful. So I think that was a way that we were really able to demonstrate that we are a caring campus. And you know, it's a journey. Everybody's on a journey to continuous improvements, and that's why we're so happy to be a part of Caring Campus. But I do think we had a really great experience with these 2 student-centered outreaches, and I'm really happy that I had an opportunity to share that with everyone.
Christina, thank you so much for describing in detail the work that San Antonio College conducted. Let's move on now to the next commitment. This next commitment is know what other departments do. One of the things that we found in our coaching facilitations around the country with so many colleges is even though our professional staff may be experts in their area and they have maybe worked at their campus for 20 or 30 years, they do not know what other departments do fully. So it's very difficult for them to make a referral to a student to go on to another department. And so at just about every college we've worked at, there has been a deficit in understanding what departments do. In fact, we were hosting a meeting at one college and I was talking to a professional staff member and she said, "You know, I've never even been in this building." So think about this. When you yourself ask a question, maybe you're at a department store or you're somewhere and you get sent to the wrong department because the person advising you thought, well, gee, that's where I think this person should go, and how frustrating that is. So this commitment comes out of that work, and that is really learning about what other departments do so that you know where to send students. And the way this works is to develop department descriptions. Now, the reality is most departments already have these descriptions, but they're not widely circulated. And in addition to those department descriptions, it's important to add an FAQ. Each department knows the most common questions they get. And so by giving that out to other staff, they may be able to answer that question that a student has when you're talking to them on the phone or in face-to-face environments, or you can send them to that department for further detail. The other important thing to do is to update department listings. Sometimes our websites have listings that are old, and we know that anytime something is printed, the day it's printed, something changes. But the key is to keep those updated. And finally, it's important that when folks are transferred, we make sure that that transfer is accurately done. And by doing so, that student doesn't necessarily have to keep going from department to department and be frustrated. So we want to give you an example of one of the colleges that we work with that has done these things. And I'm going to give a shout out to Victor Valley College and my friend and colleague, President Dan Walden, who manages that college in California. And here is an example of a simple description of applying for admission and what the Admissions and Records Office does. So I'll leave that up for a second. I don't need to read it to you. But you can take a look at, it's brief, but it describes in general terms what that A&R office does, and then they have further detail about the specific services of the Admissions and Records Department. All right, let's move on to the next slide. I talked about an FAQ. Here is an FAQ for the Financial Aid Office. And what you'll see here are the common questions that students ask about financial aid, and especially during these times, because they list here, as you can see in the answer to the first question, COVID-19. The thing to also note is that Victor Valley College has gone even a step further. And not only on their FAQ do they have a written version, but notice the shout out at the bottom that says, ask the FA RAM. Now, ask the FA is the Financial Aid Office. The RAM is the college symbol, so it's a RAM, and they also have what's called RAM ambassadors. And so that is actually a chat box where you can click on that, and someone from the Financial Aid Office will be able to address your question. So it's really just handy to have this FAQ with every staff member that is out making phone calls. And then the final thing to share with you is a listing of staff members, so that even if you don't know the staff, and I imagine Victor Valley probably has 250 staff members, you can see that their name is listed and their title and a little bit about what they do, such as financial aid specialists or homeless youth liaison or foster youth liaison financial aid specialist. So it's listed there. Also noticed in the third column, it has whether or not they're bilingual. One of the things that we advise folks to do is not only just list that they are bilingual, but because we have so many different languages of folks coming to us from all around the world, that we list the languages that they speak. And of course, to the right of that are their email addresses in order to get in touch with them. So let's move on to behavioral commitment 3, what we call warm transfers. Now, normally in the traditional face-to-face world, there are a couple things that we suggest when colleges talk about these warm transfers. The first is that when a student comes up to, let's say, the Admissions and Records Office and they have a financial aid question that can't be answered, that the person in A&R calls ahead to the Financial Aid Office, describes the question, and then asks that person to be available to serve the student. So then the question is, what does that look like in our COVID-19 environment? One of the things we're suggesting to do, which is exactly what Christina talked about, is to actually call each student. But once you get that question that you can't answer, that you actually call ahead to that department, giving that department the student's name and contact information, as well as telling the student that someone from that department will be contacting them. What a nice service to have someone actually call and address their questions rather than saying, you need to call another number. This really shows that we're caring about that student. So the way that that goes about is you have to determine as a professional staff member who is best to answer that question, but you already have a guide of that department. You already have a listing of those members in that department, and you can call ahead and then ask them to do so. But it's not over yet. What we're also suggesting is that once you call that staff member, you call them back to make sure that that student was served and how that was resolved. So whatever question they had. So that's what we're suggesting as well. And I know it seems like extra work, but think about in your own life when you get sent to a department, you get sent somewhere and it's the wrong department. No one follows up. No one knows what to do. And so it's incredibly frustrating. I have great stories about DirecTV and Verizon Wireless if anyone wants to chat about their experiences being sent to the wrong departments over and over again. So with that, what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Jordan Horowitz, who's going to share with you that contact log suggestion that Christina talked about. Jordan?
Hi, everyone. So here's an example of a contact log. And one of the nice things about the way we're suggesting doing follow-up is you're also not keeping the student on hold while you do your search. You've taken their contact information and let them know that someone will be getting back to them. This is the contact log that we suggest, and it's, as you can see, it's pretty complete. We include the student's name and the student's phone number, as well as their ID number. And of course, you want to have their the date of the contact and the time of the contact. You want to know the contact mode. Was this an email, a phone number? Was it a text message? Did the student express any needs, and how did you respond to those needs? Did you answer the question? Did you refer to someone else? And was follow-up required, yes or no? And how was the follow-up conducted? Referred to Susan in financial aid, or sent materials about fall registration? And the date of the follow-up, whether it was finished or if there is a date that needs to be followed up in the future. One of the other nice things about keeping a log like this is during weekly calls with all your staff, you have the ability to identify common needs and develop standard responses that then everyone else can use. So those are the three commitments. We have the know your departments, warm transfers, and being proactive. And those are all in the first guide to providing student support services in extraordinary times. Coming soon, in fact, we're hoping to get our second guide out next week. We'll provide leadership behaviors about how you can support your staff. The third guide will provide behaviors that address student equity issues. Both of these also will have webinars attached. And also, we have an upcoming newsletter. I want to note that the webinar, each of the participants will receive an email that has the webinar link to it, so you'll be able to view it over again. And there's also going to be a link to a very brief 4-item survey on SurveyMonkey for your feedback about this webinar. IEBC is a continuous improvement organization, and we're always interested in your feedback about our work. If you'd like to contact us, here is contact information for Brad and me, as well as Janet Knoll, our administrative manager. If you'd like any information about the webinar, the guides, or how you might bring Caring Campus to your college, please don't hesitate to call us. I'd also like to thank at this time Christina Horton from San Antonio College for helping us out, and her her wonderful information and participation. I'd also like to thank Victor Valley College, as well as Barstow College and Riverside City College, for providing us with examples and samples of their work that we could build into this webinar. And of course, I'd like to thank our IEBC team, Janet Noel, Natalie Brotz, Dana Quittner, and our superb team of coaches. So now let's go to questions. And I'll start. I have a couple of questions here that I'll address right away. First, some folks were asking about references. We will try to include those in the email to you, but quickly, the first is Vincent Tinto, T-I-N-T-O, his book Leaving College from 1993. There's Richard Light, spelled just like the light bulb, Making the Most of College. And that was published in 2001. And there's another book that's an edited volume that is more research-based, but you might find interesting, called Student Engagement in Higher Education. It's edited by Harper and Quay, Q-U-A-Y-E, and this was published in 2009. And those are some texts that you might want to look to. At this time, I also want to put in a plug for our other book. Our other major effort is data use, and you can find Creating a Data-Informed College in Harvard Education Presses and on Amazon, Creating Data-Informed Culture in Community Colleges. We also had a question, somebody brought up the issue of students wondering, feeling kind of stalked when they were contacted. And that's why it's important to have a opening remarks that kind of calms the student down. So in your opening remarks, you might want to say, I'm calling from whatever your college is. We got your contact information from your registration form, and that's how I got your phone number, and I'm calling to see how you're doing and if you have any questions or issues. Are there any other questions in chat that you'd like to address, Brad?
Yes, thank you, Jordan. There's a few of them actually. There's one coming from the library, and how is it best for the library to reach out? So in a face-to-face environment, what we ask library workers to do is actually walk the stacks. One of the things that we've learned very quickly is that where do students go when they are vulnerable? So they're crying, they're upset. They go to one of three places on a campus. They may go to their cars to cry if they have a car. If they don't have a car, they may go to the bathroom, or they go to the stacks in the library. So from a face-to-face experience, walking the stacks and checking in on students and introducing yourself and saying hello is a good way to do that. From the other point of view, having librarians, having library workers making calls to students, asking if there's any issues they have, or if there's a particular area that the library is supporting, the Learning Center is supporting, making sure that that's part of the comments that people have in terms of any resources that they can connect with and so forth. Another question was Starfish Early Alert is a big thing right now. I am very familiar with Starfish. I have to tell you that the folks at Hobson's who own Starfish are kind of mad at me. I do a number of keynotes, and one of the things we talk about in the early alert side of things is the early alert systems that are electronic are unfortunately not as robust in terms of their use as we would hope. In most institutions that we've worked with, the average percent of early alerts that actually get submitted primarily by faculty is about 30%. I have heard of some institutions that have gotten that number much higher, up to about 70%. But quite frankly, the best early alert is the faculty or staff member that recognizes that behavior and is able to intervene right away. So while I appreciate these systems, I have not seen their use grow to anything really above 70%, but averaging about 30%. So I'd love to see them actually grow in some way. We just have not seen that yet.
There was a question for Christina much earlier on that maybe you'd like to address, Christina. folks were wondering about the size of your calling team. How many staff did you involve in making these calls, and kind of where did they come from?
There were right under 50 callers that participated in the project, and they came from all three of our divisions. So we had folks from student success, from academic success, and from college services that participated on the team.
Thanks. We've also had a number of questions about specific slides, such as folks were trying to take notes on the fields in the call log and some other information earlier on. As I mentioned, you will get a link to the webinar. You'll be able to go through all the slides and take your notes and make copies. Christina, do you want to mention again how many students you reached out to and for some of the groups?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I can. I know I was talking very fast. I was doing my best to stay in my time limit. So we had 3,500 students between those two separate outreaches that we called. 3,000 from students who data suggested had never been in an online class, and then 500 that were reported by faculty to not have been active in Zoom since the transition to fully remote learning and teaching.
Thanks. There was a question about how to keep up with changing messages. This is why we also recommend regular presidential notices to everyone on campus, so that folks know that every Thursday afternoon they can count on an update from the most recent things going on at your college, in your district, around your state. And so if you provide regular updates, people start to get to rely on that and are able to know how to make sure that the most up-to-date available information is available. And also we highly recommend, as you'll know, weekly staff meetings, so you can keep your staff updated as they get information and reach out to students or respond to students' concerns and issues.
Jordan, we have another question by Adriana, who's asking, in an online environment, they worry about students who are lost when it comes to the research. So we know that new students and first generation tend to have lower outcomes than other students. If we look at FTIC, what we call first time in college, we can separate those out and see that those students tend not to do as well. And so she's asking about, can departments usually get access to those students' info before we reach out? So what we get into a little bit is what's called FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And generally, FERPA enables college employees to have access. So putting a little code on that through your research department, provided that legal counsel says that's okay to do. Generally, FERPA does allow that. So it's also thinking about prioritization. So you may have, as Christina did, 3,500 students to reach out to, but you may want to prioritize the most vulnerable students first. And maybe if you don't reach them the first time and then you say, okay, wasn't able to reach, maybe you try at a different time. So we try to ensure that when we call out to students that we do and establish some sort of a prioritization to do so.
Someone asked about using Zoom for departmental meetings I'm assuming you're talking about instructional departments, reaching out to students in your department and using Zoom as a platform for that. I think you need to judge that based on the size of academic departments and the number of faculty. So in a Zoom, something like this, a Zoom meeting with a couple of hundred students, if you're definitely going to need a technician to manage the chat and everything along with it. But so I don't think it's impossible, but I think that Zoom meetings to reach all students at once may not be the most effective way of ensuring that students are feeling cared about and their individual needs are being concerned.
Yeah, the key is something we call moments that matter. And moments that matter is a concept by which when an individual actor a faculty member or staff member actually connects with a student and that student feels cared about by that faculty member or staff member. And using Zoom is a bit antiseptic. And if you have a couple hundred people, as Jordan said, that may not make them feel the way we want everyone to feel. By the way, we have another question, is a really good one, about have colleges provided cell phones to staff who are making calls? And if so, how are they provided? And Christina, do you want to talk about how that works at San Antonio College?
Sure. So what we've done, we have provided technology support for remote working and teaching. And essentially what that means is our full-time staff, faculty, and adjuncts were provided a monthly telecommunications allowance, and our eligible part-time employees were also provided a monthly allowance to offset.
Great. So what San Antonio College is doing is offsetting an already existing Verizon or T-Mobile or Sprint bill so that those calls could be made and not worry about overage charges.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Christina.
Sure.
And how did you use Google Numbers, Christina?
Yeah, the Google Chat function. How did you use the Google Chat?
The Google Voice?
Yes.
Yeah, so we were able to set up, I guess you'd call it a mass number, an alternate number, so that the number the student is receiving is a Google number that rings to your cell phone. And then there's also a way to set a preference that when those calls come in, you can distinguish those calls that are coming in to your Google number versus your primary cell phone number. And it's free. So a lot of our folks ended up doing that prior to making these calls, just in the interest of privacy. So that combined with Star 67 was really effective for us.
Well, that's great. And Michael Allen just shared with us that the Google Voice can be accessed through your computer, so you don't have to use your cell phone data. Thank you, Michael, for adding that. That's really quite helpful. One of the other questions we got was, with regulations constantly changing, how do we continue to be consistent in our messaging to students? Well, we know that is something that happens whether we're in COVID-19 or face-to-face. And the key is constant communication with students. And that is either through a social media function, because what's fascinating, I find, is my daughter happens to work in the social media world. And right now, folks are primarily using things like Instagram. They're not on Facebook anywhere near to the degree that many of us still are. And so we have to use the channels that they use. So it's really important that information is posted everywhere. We know that in our own institutions, we're very siloed. So the more information that's out there, and it can't just be erroneous information like nice to know. What we always talk about at IEBC is, what do folks need to know in order to do their job? So thank you for that question.
Yeah, so our efforts to contact students started well before COVID and will continue after. So especially with advisors and faculty, that's really the consistent connection for students. Advisors are reaching out to students as we go into summer to make sure that they're prepared and equipped to complete spring and get into summer successfully. We are working with some of the callers from this previous team to move them into other opportunities where they can continue to work with students through calls and texts and chats, etc.
Thank you.
Thanks. A couple of other suggestions that have come through from participants. Folks are using Microsoft Teams that allows them to contact students and students to contact them back. Another college has Cisco phones and uses Cisco Jabber client, which allows them to use their work phone wherever they are. So we're nearing the end. I want to remind everybody that you will be receiving an email that has a link to a brief survey on SurveyMonkey that we would greatly appreciate you filling out. It also will contain a link to the webinar, so all the slides as well as the audio will be available to you. And with that, I'll turn it over to our CEO, Brad Phillips, for any closing remarks.
Well, first, I want to thank everyone for sticking with us throughout this webinar. We had over 350 folks actually attend, and you even stayed for the chat, which is quite wonderful in terms of our Q&A period. Please note that our information was listed earlier. If you'd like to contact us privately, please don't hesitate to do so. We continue to provide information about Caring Campus on our website and through other media channels. And we just want to thank all of you for how much you care about your students and wish you well. Please stay safe in this COVID-19 time and take care. And the weekend's almost here, so please enjoy your weekend. Best wishes to everyone. Thank you.
Please feel free to share copies of this webinar with your colleagues.